You can check the numbers for Norway against the one for Ukraine. And you can check the numbers for Bulgaria. The difference in numbers is really astonishing, and this is what we should strive for, obviously, in the field of energy audit. Next slide, please. For the sake of impartiality, let us have a brief overlook of the concept of household construction in Ukraine. It's about more than 90 million of houses, rural regions included, and 90% of them erected already at the times of the USSR or even earlier. These numbers may really compel one to think about energy efficiency and the scope of modernization that awaits us. We also need to remember that the vision of energy efficiency in Soviet time was entirely different from what it has been perceived like now, because before it was about more flats for residents, and there were plenty of energy resources, and that's why we ended up with old-time Khrushchevka-style low-rise house condominiums. That essentially should be renovated or demolished altogether. By early 90s, the housing program was not performed, was not fulfilled, and the energy resources became more expensive and less abundant. Later construction efforts also differed considerably from the ideas of energy efficiency in Europe. The situation with energy efficiency has really improved for the past 15 years with better construction materials and better technologies used. Anyway, the overall situation in the housing fund of Ukraine is really far from good. The situation is aggravated with increased prices for energy, and
this is the problems that have already been inherited from Soviet past. One of the most, let's say, painful problem is non-efficient constructions, outdated methodology of lack of automatic instruments for heat consumption, and non-controlled infiltration of air through windows and doors, and lack of capital repairs in the buildings. Next slide, please. What do we do with the problems listed based on the contemporary knowledge? The answer is simple. We must have thermal modernization of buildings, must be affected easily, and must be in a complex way, and in many cases the problem is neglected. Typically they just replace the dwellers, they replace the heating devices, which finally end up in negative consequences. For instance, in some dwellings you have 25 centigrade, in some of the flats they have only 19 degrees centigrade with ambient temperature, and we must have energy saving measures as follows: to warm up walls, insulation, thermal insulation of roofs and cellars, automated thermal units with measuring registration devices for thermal consumption, and replacement of all the heating devices by radiators. So we must be aimed at savings of funds for citizens, for dwellers. The replacement of heating devices is only ending up in increased temperature inside buildings, but nothing in sense of energy saving. And the automatic devices for temperature control, they enables to increase savings, and presence of heat meters enables to measure it in monetary sense. So we may have savings of 20 to 60% in many cases. In some cases, you can reach up to 78% per one building in order to do everything properly and with a high efficiency. And finally, to have positive effect for individual building, the energy audit must be exercised first of all. So what is energy audit? Energy audit is type of activity aimed at decrease of power consumption as a result to save costs. The aim of energy audit is to understand where energy is being spent inefficiently, increase the energy efficiency, understand the potential energy savings, and final result of energy audit must be a report containing recommendations and advices like thermal insulation of a building, recommendations in system tuning, measurements, and monetization of savings, not only for heating systems but hot water supply and power supply of individual buildings. Dear colleagues, sorry for technical problems. So we have heard the theoretical fundamentals of everything, or rather to say, what do we have in fact, and let us tackle the Kyiv practical cases. I give floor to Petro Panteleyev, deputy head of Kyiv City State Administration, and they have very proper system approaches that will enable us to improve the situation within the audits and for people to have more heat in the apartments and pay less for that. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Last year we took a piece of energy auditors' job, not because we do not support this approach, but because we have a lack of time, and we must improve the situation with energy losses in housing and buildings. So our approach was as follows. We ran a so-called surface energy audit, means we understood what power, what energy do we use to heat up 1 square meter in our buildings, and around 2,000 buildings in Kyiv, we have them in a so-called risk group. It's more than 150 kilowatt hours per 1 square meters, and we targeted those buildings as our primary aim, and we have planned certain steps in power registration and decrease of energy consumption. Secondly, we have adopted the concept of energy savings based on 3 major factors. First of all, it's a total registration of thermal energy consumed, and the situation is critical. We only have 30% of Kyiv buildings equipped with the thermal meter or heat meters. By the end of last year, we have installed 800 meters already, heat meters, and this year we plan to have 2,500 meters to install by means of KyivEnergo financial support, and we'd like that any consumer to pay for the actually used thermal consumption. And a meter, it's just an instrument to measure the thermal energy consumed. But if we're speaking about costs, then any dweller could save 15 to 20% of spendings in sense of money. And so second step is registration itself, and third step is projects aimed at replacement of gas consumption in Kyiv to generate thermal energy. Kyiv uses 1,900,000,000 cubic meters of gas annually, and of course we have a great potential here for savings. Again, in the budget we are presenting today, and hopefully it will be adopted, we have projects in that budget to decrease gas consumption, and normative or say regulatory changes. We understand today how to tackle these or that problems. We don't have a proper regulations in hand, and in our legislation we must have certain changes at a level of the national level. And Serhiy Ivanovich Kushnir now do some steps in order for energy service contracts to be legalized and to start working on them. And again, we support the initiatives that are being implemented by the Ministry of Regional Development, and this year we expect to have realistic legal sources in order to do more steps in energy savings, not only based on state budget costs, but as well with the support of the households themselves, to be able to move further on and to involve the households, owners. As for the metering fleet, we understand it's a very proper approach. We ask Kyiv citizens to read meter readings, and we adopted a special procedure for citizens to control over the meters and readings. So we have now special instructions in our website of Kyiv City State Administration. There's a telephone number 1551. We have a very rather simple procedure how to do it, in order for them to understand that we do not invent anything, we do not lie as for the energy consumed. That's why the situation as I described it, and one of the priorities today for the budget 2015 is energy saving. Energy saving in sense, and we allocate much more money to support energy saving projects, because those projects are feasible. They will bring real wellness in the nearest future. As for the buildings, first of all, we must concentrate our efforts on the buildings of budgeted nature. Means we have a specialized enterprise that will be involved in this activity, and we will involve third-party auditors, because we have a great load in this sense. Again, we must not neglect the thermal grid. you know the situation with that, and we have special devices like aerial photography with thermal vision devices, and we will understand in that case what parts of a thermal grid must be thermally insulated. As well, we are speaking about schools, kindergartens, hospitals, etc. The buildings that are supported from the state budget. Again, as we're speaking about the buildings and housing, we must have certain mechanisms to work there, mechanisms that could be similar to the energy service company, because otherwise we won't be able to, with the use only of state budget or local budget, to support the entire activities. And we have a good example from Lithuania. We must take it, we equip it.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like now to give the floor to Serhiy Kushnir, head of the Department for Life Support System on the Ministry of Regional Development, to speak exactly on how to legalize the whole energy audit system to provide for legal grounds for their operation. Thank you. As regards energy saving, I'd like to split our existing buildings into three categories. One is about the budget sphere, with buildings supported from with funds from the budget. It includes schools, hospitals, etc. The second category is private buildings and high-rise condominiums. Why so? Because each of these categories is not energy efficient, but the range of problems in each of these is different, and this certainly requires different approaches. If we take the private sectors, with the view of gradual rise in tariffs to make them really at par with cost involved, I think private buildings will have to invest into improving their energy consumption and improving their energy efficiency, also with a view of the need to pay for the resources consumed. The state has already begun developing assistance and aids mechanisms. Take, for example, last year's resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers to replace the gas-fueled boilers into the one working on solid fuels. At the moment, there is another resolution being produced to expand the range of measures that will benefit from government assistance. It will also include purchase of necessary equipment. As regards the budget sphere, there is practically no possibility for energy efficiency measures in this area because it does require heavy investments, and one of possible mechanisms is the implementation of energy servicing and delivery contracts. Some of the ideas regarding that were already voiced in the Parliament and motioned to parliamentary committees, and the Parliament copes with the Ministry of Regional Development over related draft regulations in an attempt to attract investors into energy improvements in the budget sphere. As regards condominiums, this is by far the most problem-ridden sector because it may not be possible to correct the situation by simply increasing tariffs for them. They're not just non-efficient, but their current operation and maintenance begs a lot to be desired, and issues of capital repairs of these buildings have never been resolved. Add to here issues with property status of such condominiums. At this moment, I think we need to recognize as the state and as condominium owners that it is not possible to provide for capital repairs and refurbishment of such condominiums with funds from the national budget. And in all likelihood, the situation will continue, as most of these flats in such condominiums have been transferred into ownership of the dwellers free of charge, and it is now the dwellers who have to bear the costs of improvements and energy-related improvements of their flats. Another point of concern is the system of metering of consumption. And then we have problems with energy audit and necessary modernization steps to be taken. It does require legislative changes to be introduced, and these changes, we hope, will allow us establishing a mechanism to attract investments, and there's quite a number of banking institutions showing interest in providing loan facilities for refurbishment or renovation of the existing housing sector. It is a huge market that is still not developed, and we do expect that the Parliament will provide for quick consideration of related pieces of legislation to finally come up with a mechanism for attraction of investments. And we also hope that this will include measures to increase public awareness among the residents about the need of energy efficiency in housing sector.
Thank you, Sergey. It's an interesting information on the system-wise approach of the state to energy supply. So, Deputy Head of Kyiv City State Administration delivered certain information on the Kyiv dwellings, but in order for the works on the implementation to be most efficient, we must have energy audits, and I know that KyivEnergo now is about to start the energy audit services. So I would like to learn more in details what is energy audit, what would be the result. I give floor to Commercial Director of KyivEnergo, Mr. Yevhen Bushma. Thank you, Dmytro. Our colleagues delivered a lot of theoretical issues to us, and it is proven by practical steps. Last year, our country faced the problems of energy resources to a great extent, and we are the biggest company in Kyiv, supplier of electric power, heating, and hot water. So we had to have our own considerations as for the steps aimed at energy efficiency, more rational use of energy resources we produce, generate, and sell to our customers. One of the sides of this problem is the proper registration of energy resources. and the other side is rational use of them. Our company started to provide this type of service, energy audit. What is energy audit? This is kind of a diagnosis you you apply to this or that building, and we are in this case like a medical practitioner that is trying to understand the condition of any building and economical efficiency of the measures to be taken in energy efficiency. The efficiency could be 20 to 60%. It depends on many things. If we take two similar 100 flat 9-storied building, they could have absolutely different consumption, not only because of different amount of GCal of thermal power, but many resources spent on many different things. So energy audit, this is a kind of a set of measures that enables you to understand all the consumption of different types of energy, compare it versus the regulated norms and standards that supports the comfortable stay of human beings in this building, and at the same time we may understand what potential effect we may have after all the energy efficiency steps could be implemented. So again, the question is how to make financing of such steps. So at the state level, we must understand, we must regulate this issue in order to understand the sources of funding, etc. So, being a KyivEnergo company, who is our, customers in the sense of energy audits? We may do energy audits both for individual buildings or private buildings and for communal type of ownership buildings, like buildings that are at the balance of housing bureaus, office buildings, all the categories of buildings mentioned. They could be audited in sense of energy consumption and in sense of increase of their energy efficiency. What steps or how it is implemented practically by our company? The steps are very standard. First of all, it's a primary registration of the data on the site. Next, we make an analysis of the data. Next, we have the energy survey of the building. And finally, the customer has a report based on this energy audit, including energy passport of a building. And then you may have certain steps in order to have proper outcomes, means a certain effect in savings of the funds of the building dwellers and savings in different level of consumption for different types of energy. Thank you very much. I believe that there will be a lot of issues, a lot of questions to you, but since you've already tackled the issue of funding of such project, I give floor to financial people, deputy head of Ukrgazbank, board of. I would like to put the accents.
I'd like to bring the focus of attention to 2015, and I think that the issues with financing will be more about the change in the attitudes of our people, for them to understand that for heat you will also need a loan, in as much as people regularly attract loans for vehicles, for houses, for household equipment. And this will be about certain loan which, if consumed correctly, will provide certain saving. That way the loan will be repaid. Our bank is the first in Ukraine that started offering loans to condominiums. When we just entered that market, we thought that there will be people really lining up to us in search for this loan facility, because years ago we had lots of criticism on banks regarding their inability to offer any energy efficiency related loans. There was also a question of collateral for such loan facilities, because most of the houses were old enough not to serve a good collateral for that. There was also a problem with associations of condominium owners being not legal institutions, and the need for banks to create reserves to cover the loans the issue. So it was a kind of experiment for us, an experiment with a new product rolled out on the market. I can tell you that in a year and a half that we've been doing it, that the situation hasn't changed drastically. Of all the number of associations of condominium owners, we have a couple of hundreds of them that are really active, and they hold some sort of events. They launch kind of awareness campaigns. Some of them took loans from our bank and other banks. But anyway, as we are, I'm pretty much sure, the only bank that provides loan facilities for condominium owners on energy efficiency. So the simple statistics and early experience show that the interest that condominium owners have to pay is really a hefty one. But even so, the savings that such energy efficiency measures allow, they provide for really material savings, which at times may reach 30 to 40 to 50%. Even the most basic variant of energy saving measures taken against the loan from a bank may be repaid in 2.5 years, with advanced measures like changes of windows, doors, and further thermal insulation measures will further increase the benefits. You all know that tariffs on energy resources will continue to grow, and most probably even advanced energy saving measures will repay not in 5 or 7 years, but sooner, very much sooner. Anyway, the current situation is that many associations of condominium owners, even knowing there are banks that offer loans on energy efficiency measures, they're not really very proactive. There have been a number of measures taken by some city administrations or oblast administrations in Lutsk, elsewhere. Say in Lutsk, the oblast state administration expressed its readiness to pay the interest on loan facility for such associations of condominium owners as an additional incentive, but nevertheless it hardly spurred any further interest in that, and we as the bank see our major task for this year to really boost public attention in that. And at times I even feel myself as a preacher, if you want, as a chief evangelist, not a bank representative, trying to convince people how beneficial energy efficiency related loans may turn out for them. at least those associations of condominium owners who already used that type of loan, they already felt the benefits of it, and now they're more willing to come for another sort of loan to further improve their internal infrastructure. But anyway, given the rough number of associations at around 17,000, with 5 or 6 loans being issued on an annual basis, it will take us 1,000 years or so to cover all of them with our measures. We do hope also that state support in terms of loan repayment, say in the amount of up to 40% of the total amount of loan, if used for the purchase of boiling and thermal processing plant, it may be interesting. It could be a very important step and a nice incentive for associations of condominium owners to look for such loans. Anyway, we work actively with these associations, with some of the leading associations that already use such loan facilities. We also work with the State Committee for Energy Efficiency and Energy Saving, with the Life Support Department from the Ministry of Regional Development. And most of the time, I see our work as really evangelizing about the need of energy efficiency measures. For many years, people have been used and learned into thinking that thermal energy and other resources and utilities are really dirt cheap, and it should be a pain for someone else to think about how to make it in a more efficient way. The time is ripe now for the people themselves to see into ways of saving their own costs of living, if you want, by providing for optimal use of energy resources they consume. Thank you. Thank you. That's
It's really very interesting that we are speaking about the commodity, and in fact, from what I heard, the system of ex-Soviet Union is being collapsed, and only now we are trying not to be Soviet style. We must be responsible for our interests in our own building, in our own apartment, in order to pay for something you really consumed, for air or heat or something. Now I give floor to Yevhen Nikitin, and next to Hryhoriy Romanyuk, please. They are professionals. Thank you. Thank you for organizers for this very important topic. And in fact, if we'd like to increase energy efficiency of any site, we must start with the energy audit, not only speaking about buildings, all types of the sites. And most important for us are buildings, of course, because we live there. And again, the highest savings we may have from buildings, and my colleagues already named figures. It's, in my experience, in hospitals and schools, we may have savings of 40–45% of energy. What is the aim of any energy audit? Of course, to save certain energy, to make savings in sense of money, and this is only one aim. Another aim is to provide for, to secure the proper, comfortable thermal environment. And it's not a secret that in many cases, there are certain recommendations to normalize the thermal regime. It's very important that being represented the energy auditing company here, I understand that it's very important that no misunderstanding to be arose between the customer and energy auditor, because we have two tasks. First one is to compare what energy are we consuming and what we have to consume according to certain standards. And again, speaking of standards, should it be standards of our past and standards that were in use when the building was commissioned, and or modern standards? Second issue is to develop a set of steps in increase of energy efficiency, increasing the thermal comfort in the building. We must differ between two things here. First, energy efficiency of the step, and secondly, what cost is related to that, means technical/economical efficiency. And energy auditor in his report must state clearly what it will be, what the efficiency will be, and what money will be incurred in relation to that, because we may have certain economical differences, and at the same time the funding could be limited, like we are facing the supermarket problems when we want to buy this and that, and we are very limited in our funds. The activity in energy auditing of buildings, it's only the gross level, means the initial level. It must be very of high quality for customers to trust energy auditors. And of course, we are using USAID projects, Scandinavian NEFCA Corporation projects. We have some Ukrainian financial lines of credit of our banks. Those audits, pilot, so to say, they are based on certain standards, and it's very important that those standards being observed. Of course, it is very important for the energy auditors to be able to control their own quality, to be controlled by certain public organizations. And the energy audit report, this is kind of a financial document. In my mind, the auditors must stay in close cooperation with the banks. It means energy auditors must be advisors to not only banks but any financial institutions, and they should say believe in energy auditing results. We have a great experience from Poland when banks are advising the energy auditors, advisors to the banks in this sense. Energy audit organization, in my mind, must be independent, because they should be independent from the equipment suppliers, energy suppliers, etc. So they must be very unbound in their evaluations. My colleague from a bank, he complained that it is not very active, taking loans or borrowing for thermal modernization of any buildings. On the other hand, we have rather active work in modernization of hospitals, schools, etc. The answer is very simple, because 1 gigacal in Kyiv, the cost of that roughly is 1,300 hryvnia per 1 gigacal. The cost for condominiums that are consuming this energy is 2 times lower, and this could be a cause of a reason for savings.
Dear colleagues, I'd like to add to what has already been said here. This is probably the first time that I'm in total agreement with everyone speaking here. This is the first time for the 5-year period. And energy audit is not just about papers, it's also technical stuff. It's actually a preparational phase before modernization, and energy auditors are professionals, compared with medical science. It's like general practitioners who have to diagnose correctly to enable the healing. And speaking of technicalities, local domestic auditors are truly capable to assess and calculate all the measures necessary, all the repayment terms and efficiency ratios. The only intention would be to have this audit within the concept of overall modernization. My organization has already had around 300 audits. But the thing is that the real modernization projects were just 20 or 30 of them so far. And it begs another conference to explain why the results of such audits are seldom used for some real modernization projects. Most of the time we see pilot projects, grant-based projects, or some projects piloted by the government. But again, the real question is why we're so slow in implementing the results in practice. But in terms of our capacities, we are ready to do energy audit of the whole of Ukraine. We are really ready for it. I'd like to thank everyone, all the presenters here. We have 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. Artem Jepko, I have a question to Mr. Yevhen. Mr. Yevhen, how much will it cost to ask a skilled energy auditor to come? So to install a meter, a heat meter. I think my colleagues will share my opinion that it is really a challenging task to whistle up the final figure of an energy audit, because it really depends on the property itself and its characteristics. Some preliminary figures need certain analysis to be taken. If you still want some number, according to our estimates, according to the proposals that we have, an average price for the energy audit for a 100 flat condominium may be from 8 to 10,000 hryvnias, which is ultimately not that much if the amount is split among all the flats, and if it is done in order to determine what to improve in that condominium to reduce energy consumption. As regards meters installation, as from what I gather, you mean the in-house meters. Again, this depends on the type of such meter and other nuances which may bring you the final amount of a couple of tens of thousands hryvnias. I mean the whole cycle with installation.
Okay. Oksana several questions to Mr. Linov. Do loans could cover the spendings on energy audits or the measures for energy efficiency improvement? And is this the ground for submitting an application for energy audit? And 45%, to my understanding, it's kind of a capital money of the loans. To what extent this issue is elaborated, and could this be applied to a regulation that will be aimed at improvement of the borrower standing? First question: we give out any loan, we could lend money to condominium to support any steps in energy efficiency. Could be energy audit, could be energy modernization or repair of elevators. It's not a mandatory prerequisite, but if condominium decides that they should have this, okay, we'll lend them money, 8, 10, 12,000 hryvnia. As for the compensation, being a bank, we are only involved here because we work with state energy efficiency. We work like an advisors here, because it is not yet included, not stipulated by the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers, and in the nearest future, probably the nearest months, and 40% of compensation will be at least applicable to the measures that will be follow-up steps after the loan is awarded. So I couldn't be very specific in this because this issue, this question is rather question to energy efficiency agencies. Okay, I only read these draft regulations in the part that is interesting for me as a bank representative. The only thing I'm interested in the mechanism to be simple, because the mechanism of dated 2013 contained very complicated scenarios, and we understood that nothing could be achieved with the use of that type. So now we understand that it is very fast and simple mechanism. So in February we have energy audit. Next month we may transfer 40% of money. So most probably we will give out first loan for construction materials or just materials. Second loan will be to support works. So compensation is dealing with the first type of loan, materials, etc. No, it will be the borrower takes a loan for 5 years, and the compensation must be paid next month, 40% of compensation. I have 2 questions. Next to you. Good afternoon, colleagues. Alexey Ryabchin, parliamentarian from the Standing Committee of the Verkhovna Rada on Energy Saving. It's rather a reflection than question. First of all, thank you for Ukraine Crisis Media Center for this roundtable, and tomorrow we'll have a meeting of a working group on the draft law on energy efficiency, energy audits, etc. Energy audit is one of the key issues there. So thank you for your advices and your knowledge. Your standpoint will be represented there. Other than the law on energy efficiency, we have a draft law on Esko, Energy Service Company, and we compromised between 2 draft laws with 2 different concepts. I believe that that project will again be entered to passed to the parliament, and as a parliamentarian of Verkhovna Rada, I met a lot of representatives of foreign embassies, Bank of Reconstruction and Development. Today I had a meeting with the head of State Treasury of the USA, and the issues of energy efficiency, energy security is one of the key issues for our partners. Many investors, they are ready to come to Ukraine, specifically if they understand that the tariffs will increase, the project payback period will be shortened, and I see that this is a trend in the civil society, that the experts could render the expert evaluation. So thank you for your knowledge.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you so much. This is exactly a show of democracy in action. And this approach this is the first time that we see an MP at our round table expressing his readiness to react to our proposals. Vladimir Zadvorny, Ukrainian radio. I have a question to Hryhoriy Romanyuk. You mentioned you had around 300 audits and just 20 or 30 real modernization projects. My question is how much a modernization of a 9-story household building, condominium, might cost, and where did you see this willingness to go on with modernization? The question is not that these people express their readiness to undergo modernization, but speaking of real projects on energy modernization, it was a bunch of projects which were scattered all around Ukraine, and Lutsk really takes the lead here with the 2 compounds, residential compounds, already modernized there. It is hard still to mention prices or give any quotations because the exchange rate was 8 at that time. And at that time, for a 9-story residential compound in Lutsk, it was about 2 million, with repayment period of about 10 years. That is just 2 million hryvnias to improve thermal insulation of walls, to replace windows in the public areas, and to balance the heat distribution system. And the second building, it is represented by Yulia Sabatyuk, the head of the local association of condominium owners. So the calculated efficiency ratio was about 74% of saving, and she was often told that it was too much. But then they went for full thermal upgrades, thermal modernization, everything, nearly everything was changed in terms of windows, doors, etc. That brought the efficiency ratio to almost 80%. It was a 16-story residential compound. And again, it was, by that time, it was about 2.5 million hryvnias for a 9-story building, but again, with exchange rate, US to hryvnia exchange rate at 8. In terms of residential buildings, well, they also were modernization projects under the Kyoto Protocol. We had a number of energy audits of kindergartens here for their later thermal insulation and modernization. 5 buildings in Lutsk took loan for an individual boiler plant for them, and that was preceded by an energy audit as well. So this is probably the response to you about the readiness in people to do something and to invest into that, or to look for loans from that. And we would really like to see greater turnout, if you want. And I think that the mechanism of energy servicing companies would really improve situation with hospitals, with schools, and other budget-financed facilities. There was a TV show with the Kyiv, I think, Economic Institute on this matter, and they really exposed the problem to a great detail. And they explain how it might be possible to improve the level of energy efficiency to grade B, which would be enviable achievement even for Europe. At the moment, we still more enthusiasm, individual enthusiasm, but not a common move. Dear colleagues, we are running short of time now. I have a question, I think, to the representative of the Ministry for Regional Development. I know that in Lutsk they use a scheme where the company doing these energy efficiency auditing measures was de facto given the status of the energy servicing company, and the savings, consumption savings went to that company. Is it possible to roll out this practice to other cities as well, say to Kyiv, also in terms of attracting bank loans for that? Yeah, exactly. We're speaking about ESCO-related mechanism here, and probably the representative of the ministry will say more on that. But we all know of legislation on that developed already. When service provider provides also thermal modernization at his own expense, and then settles accounts with utility supplying companies. That way, the residents, without investing really into it, get all the benefits. And this is exactly how the energy servicing company related mechanism works. Actually, it is not a legislation, the law, but it's just a draft law at the moment.
Yes, in fact, this mechanism is practically one of the variations of the energy service contracts. I make a point that the draft laws passed to Verkhovna Rada, they are dealing with only state budget buildings budgeted from the state budget. So this is first stage. And second mechanism, ESCO mechanism for ordinary buildings. Based on our practices, the energy services. So we take two buildings. One has been modernized via ESCO mechanism. The other one was modernized because of the efforts of its dwellers. Then the ESCO mechanism is much more efficient because the company that provides ESCO services, this company usually is interested in the highest efficiency of any measures taken. So any countries, they've already started thermal modernization. Those mechanisms, they work very actively. If continue Lutsk theme, because we are communicating to Yulia Sabatyuk, and she is the only one representative of the only one condominium that used the three mechanism of funding. First, she took a loan for ESCO. Secondly, was a youth foundation that lended money for 3% interest rate annual. And then in 2014, she took another loan from our bank, so she has an experience of the three mechanisms. So the first one mechanism, ESCO mechanism, was the most proper. We understand that ESCO, it works in order to gain certain profit. As for the dwellers, they don't have the tariffs increased. If dwellers decides to make it there by their own, they may of course do certain savings, have certain savings, and of course they may do any things like lighting in the yard or certain benches to be placed in the yard, etc. So it depends. so they may use money according to their own wishes. Thank you very much, colleagues. First of all, thank you to our speakers, to our reports. We understand that energy audit is very important type of services, and the most proper approach to maximum efficient thermal modernization. And if any more questions, you may ask them individually to our experts, and we would like to arrange next roundtable for personnel appointments in energy sector with our esteemed parliamentarian and